The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back. When the Jints and them bums played in New York along with the Yankees. Vintage times. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and the two mavens are here with a guest. Alan Blumkin, how are you, sir?
Hello, everybody.
And
hi, Alan.
We have Noel Hynd with us. And,
thank you. Hi.
And I'll introduce the guest because he's a mainstay at the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, David Nemec. How are you, sir?
Very good. Pleasure to be joining all of you.
All right. You guys are going to talk the times, and I'll start with you, Alan. You lead us off, and you guys have a terrific show.
Thank you, Ralph.
Go for it, Alan.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm here with two very, very prolific authors, Noel Hynd, who's a regular on this show, and my good friend David Nemec. And I think for the first part of it, I let the two of them, who are strangers to each other, talk about their various book projects and their various adventures getting published and all sorts of other things that us laymen are not accustomed to. So you guys take it away.
Well, no, I know you're going to start. So.
Well, I can kick things off, and then David can jump in whenever he wants to rescue me, or before I make a complete fool of myself. However, I got into baseball writing in the mid '80s because I had written some espionage novels, but I'd always loved baseball and loved the game. So I sent in a couple of suggestions to Sports Illustrated, and much to my surprise, and even more to the surprise of everyone who knew me, they actually accepted the articles and started to print them. The first article I ever did for them was on the so-called Balata Ball of 1943, the wartime baseball. Oh, yeah. They had changed the major leagues had changed the core of the ball because they couldn't get proper rubber due to the war. All the rubber was going to military purposes, and the Japanese army had cut off the supply lines from rubber in Asia, so the United States, Spalding, just couldn't get it. So baseball came up with something that resembled a croquet ball, which they put into play, and the average 400-foot drive of 1942 became the 360-foot out of 1943. The only person who was hitting was Musial. The major leagues as a group were hitting something like 198 through the first 2 weeks of the season. Anyway, it was a fun article, and it got me going. And then sometime after that, I got the idea, somewhat resentfully, that the Brooklyn Dodgers had all these books being written about them. This is mid-'80s now, and nobody had ever done a really good comprehensive book about the Giants when they were in New York. So I decided that the perfect person to write such a book was me, and I tried to sell it to a couple of publishers. Nothing happened because they claimed I was a espionage novelist, so what could I possibly know about baseball? And so, yeah, exactly. And so with this type of mentality, they run companies into the ground year after year. But in any case, after a couple of years, my agent changed the approach and said, no, this is a writer for Sports Illustrated. Oh, well, that made all the difference. And fortunately, Nelson Doubleday owned the Mets as well as Doubleday Publishing, which was something that had changed a little bit. The equation there had changed a little bit since the previous time I tried the project around New York. So Doubleday was receptive to a baseball book, so that's how that one first got published. So that's how I lost my virginity in the sports publishing world. How about David? You might have an equally interesting story on any of your books.
Well, I'm originally a fiction writer like you, and always loved baseball, and did do articles here and there about it, but never really thought of doing a baseball book. But I did decide that what I could do were maybe quiz books. So I put together a quiz book in 1975, and ironically sold it to, it wasn't Doubleday. Doubleday did later quiz books, but sold it to Macmillan, and that got me more interested in baseball than I'd been in quite a while. I had kind of lost enthusiasm after expansion, and ran into a bit of luck in the late 70s. A friend of mine was at a party with Dan Okrent, who had just put together a package that he sold the Ultimate Baseball book, and he was casting about for someone to do the historical text. And she and the two of them hit it off, and they were talking. And he said he told her his biggest problem was that, he couldn't get anybody to do the 19th century section. And he didn't feel confident with hiring guys who really only could begin after the turn of the 20th century. So she mentioned me. She knew about my quiz books from a guy she was going with, who had said, if you want to know about 19th century baseball, this is your man. And referred me to Dan, and Dan got my phone number, called me, and told me to come up to his place and let's talk. And when I came up, he presented me with a couple pages of questions on the 19th century, and when I did pretty well on them, he hired me. And the Ultimate Baseball book was my first real endeavor in nonfiction, certainly nonfiction in baseball. And from it sprang an abiding interest that quickly took hold, and the fiction took a back seat for quite a while after that, because the 19th century really fascinated me from the beginning to end. And I hadn't really thought about it until I did the Ultimate Baseball book. That in my senior year of high school, when I was flailing about trying to find a topic to write my senior thesis on, I chose 19th century baseball, and on something of a lark. And my history teacher said, you'll never find enough to even get a decent paper out of this. And I did put together what I thought was a pretty decent paper, and I realized, wow, this is an interesting connection from my senior year in high school to now here I am, sort of a baseball historian. And that's since then I've been writing pretty much more about baseball than I have been doing the fiction. But I do still enjoy doing both. And Noel, I noticed that your Giants book began with 1873, if I'm not mistaken. Why did you begin with that year?
Well, it's the year I was born. No, I'm kidding you. Contrary to popular belief, but it's not the year I was born.
Close.
That's actually an interesting question. I was just about to get there when you keyed 19th century baseball, because when I signed the contract for Doubleday to write about the Giants, to be honest with you, was kind of ignorant of 19th century baseball, and I had the feeling I was going to start with 1900 when, the first year that there were really two major leagues as we recognize them today, and start, tracing the Giants from there. And then I started to research and realized that you couldn't possibly start in 1900 with the New York Giants because they were a very viable presence. I don't know whether the word franchise is even the right word because it was so ragtag in the 19th century. But I realized that you really had to go back to the foundations of the National League and discuss the fact that part of the lack of financial success of professional baseball and the National League was because at one point there were no teams in Philadelphia and New York, which were the two biggest cities in the country. So you really had to go back into the 1880s for the foundation of the New York Giants in order to completely understand where they came from in 1900 and how they had gone through the Players League and defections and some very bad ownership, some very tragic circumstances. So that's kind of the roundabout answer to your question. It wasn't something I chose to do so much as it was forced upon me.
Yeah, it's interesting because New York is very much a part of the National Association, the Mutuals, 1871 to 75, and then when the Mutuals joined the National League, when the association had the wheels taken out from under them, and in 1876, both New York and Philadelphia, who were bottom feeders that year, didn't put together very good teams at all, elected, to stick it to the National League, and we're not going to make our last Western road trips. It's going to be expensive. We're not winning. We have no reason to go, so we're just not going to make them. And so they left the other teams holding the bag who were expecting New York and Philadelphia to come out there and finish the schedule. And as a result, William Hulbert, the president of the National League, booted Philadelphia and New York out of the National League, the two biggest cities in the country and the two biggest drawing powers, and managed to struggle along into the 1880s without New York and Philadelphia. And it wasn't until he died in 82 and Al Spalding more or less took over his interest in the Chicago club, and Spalding was very forceful with other owners too, that he managed to convince enough other owners, well, it's time to put what Hulbert, has believed for all these years, that we can get along without Philadelphia and New York, and put teams in Philadelphia and New York, because the American Association, which had then sprang up as a rival major league, has put teams there. They're putting in the New York Mets in 83. We've got to have a representative too. So they had put in, I think that the original nickname was the Gothams in 83. They didn't become the Giants until about 85, but they were a representative team immediately because they got lucky. Two teams folded, Troy and Worcester, who were, terrible draws. They're such small cities. And the Giants got the Troy club, most of the Troy regulars, and Philadelphia got Worcester, which was a horrible team. And Philadelphia was horrible in 83, and the Giants were a representative team immediately, and by 85, they were actually a contender within 2 years. So they built up not only a following, but a very strong franchise, which lasted for the rest of the century.
Well, Troy had some, my call dropped and I disappeared for a moment or two. So if I'm asking a question that you addressed, that's the explanation. Troy had some good players, though. So it was a team that had some good players, but they were basically in a very remote area, and it was just not a commercial place for a team. Am I correct on that?
You're right. It was a very small city. It was close to Boston, close to Worcester. Those three teams were up in the Northeast. That was the only reason that Troy could hold on as long as it did. But you're right. They had, in essence, They had Buck Ewing. They had
right.
They had Tim Keith.
Mickey Welch.
They had Mickey Welch. You know,
was Roger Connor there?
Roger Connor was on the team. So there's four really standout future Hall of Famers right there. And when you brought them down to New York and you filled out the team with John Montgomery Ward and you know, players of that stature.
Tim Keith.
By '85, they were a terrific team.
Yeah.
Tim Keith came over from the Mets, right?
Keith came from Keith had originally been with Troy though. He went to the Mets, and he went to the Mets in '83, and when the Mets Mets won the pennant, the AA pennant, and put real pressure on the Gothams because the Mets were playing in a rinky-dink park. They were kind of the stepsisters, and the same ownership had control of both the Mets and the future Giants franchise. So what they did, John Day and Jim Mutry, the manager of the Giants at the time, is decided that they wanted to corral the best Mets, bring them over to the Giants, and they led off by taking Keith and Dude Esterbrook, third baseman, who was good at the time but didn't amount to much after he got to New York. And when they shanghaied them, they built themselves into an immediate contender.
Well, it's almost like a parallel situation today. If you could pluck, let's say, let's say the St. Louis Cardinals went out of business and somebody else could grab their best four players. I mean, you'd see a dramatic increase in the capabilities of that team that got those people.
Exactly.
And probably there were fewer athletes of that caliber back there, just back in those days, because the population was smaller.
Population was smaller, but there were a lot of guys who had an ambition to become ball players. So there was a fairly large talent pool, and there were minor leagues to give them, pre-major league experience. And the Giants were able to, being in New York right away, they had a terrific advantage, and they buried the Mets at the gate, so that by '85, the Mets were already on their way out. They left after the '87 season, the American Association, leaving New York literally a one-city town, because even though there was a Brooklyn team, Brooklyn was not yet part of New York. So the Giants had New York all to themselves until Brooklyn became part of New York in '97, right?
98.
They really had it all. 98. They had it all to themselves until '98.
Contrary to popular opinion, I wasn't there for that.
I missed it also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's still a bunch of people in Brooklyn believe that was the worst thing that ever happened to Brooklyn.
I know.
What?
I know.
Joining New York City. Yeah.
It's amazing. I remember I lived in Brooklyn for 2 years, and I first came to New York, and I would often say I'm going into the city to people who live in Brooklyn.
Oh yeah,
they hate me. They hate me when I said that, and I learned to keep my mouth shut and just say I'm going from Brooklyn into Manhattan, and leave it there.
David, how did you? Can you discuss how you came to write the 19th century encyclopedia?
Well, I realized, when I first started writing about the 19th century, I was looking for holes that were still there. And the biggest hole I found was that there had never been a book on the American Association as a major league, a historical portrayal of it. And that was my first objective, was to do that. And from that sprang the encyclopedia, because I realized that there's never been focus on the 19th century alone, and the evolution of the game, how it changed. The game you saw in 1871 when the National Association which I think was a major league, even though I know it's not recognized officially as such. The game in 1871 was so different from the game in 1900, which was only 29 years later. It was almost like it's a whole century and a half of what development after that occurred in terms of changes, because and I decided to cut the encyclopedia off at 1900 and just look at what players had done through the 1900 season. And when you look at somebody like Willie Keeler, Willie Keeler had I think a 369 or 370 career batting average going into the 1901 season. His average was higher than Cobb's, that Cobb retired with. And he looked at that point like, wow, this guy can hit. He's going to continue to hit. And immediately, when two major leagues formed and the foul ball became a strike, Keeler, it diminished every year. His career batting average dropped every single season until they finally retired. And just little things like that, focusing on them and doing sidebars and then providing all the stats. One thing that had never been compiled were positions played during the course of the season. And there were some gaps. The ICI sheets didn't have. Cleveland, I believe, played 80 games in, I think, 83 or 83. And they only had 79 games played at first base. So I had a task right away to try and find out who had played that 80th game at first base. And fortunately, through Ken Samuelson and McMillan, I was able to get a lot of material that other writers didn't have access to, and was able to pour through box scores and stuff like that, and found the 80th game had been played by pitcher Jim McCormick. And it really sparked my interest to really put together a full encyclopedia.
I would think that one of the problems with putting something like that together would have been, one, you didn't have anybody you could talk to who remembered anything, or if you did, it would have been extremely old. But then there's the lack of reliability of what was printed in a lot of newspapers, and then you get into contradictions between, say, a box score in one paper and a box score in the other paper. Did you run into that a lot?
Oh, absolutely. That's very good. Oh, yeah, that was the biggest problem. Huge problem, and it remains a huge problem today. I've done considerable research on the 1888 season, and I was led to it by when I was doing the encyclopedia, and I kept noticing Cap Anson, who led the league that year, hitting with I think a 344 average or something like that. I kept seeing Anson's batting average hovering in the 290s, low 300s, hovering. And then suddenly at the end of the season, he's announced as the batting title winner. And I actually went back, and when I had some free time, really a couple weeks free time, but that's what it took, to go through all the box scores I could find on the 1888 season and find that Anson indeed did not win the batting title. It'll never be taken away from him, but a teammate, Jimmy Ryan, was the actual winner. And there were other things like that, too, that I discovered as I was going through the encyclopedia. That at that point, I don't think anyone realized that Dave Orr won the 1884 American Association batting title. These were all developments fairly late in the 20th century. They were all finds done by people like, Pete Palmer was a very good source for finding stuff like that, and triggering questions at least, and which led to research that proved what Pete posited was true. So yeah, that's an excellent observation, because that happened a lot.
How long did it take you to put that book together, the first edition?
I started it in 95, finished it early in 97. But I had stuff. I had a lot of stuff to work with. I had a lot of material, and then Ken sent me things that really helped fill it out pretty quickly. So it really didn't take as long as it did to put together the revised and updated encyclopedia, which had much more in the way of stats. And by that time, things had changed so that forfeited games in the 1890s, not forfeited games, I'm sorry, protested games in the 1890s that were successfully protested, all the stats were thrown out. So all the statistics I was looking at when I put together the first encyclopedia were no longer true by the time the second encyclopedia, the revised edition, was put together, because Major League Baseball changed its stance and decided to recognize the stats from all games that had been successfully protested and completed, even though the game itself did not stand as a win or loss. The stats were included in the overall stats, and as a result, there were some major changes. Hugh Duffy lost his Triple Crown in 1894. Sam Thompson got an extra RBI championship out of it. And there were some players that had 3 or 4 games during the 1890s that were added to their stats, and it made a difference. There were some new leaders, and ERA averages shot up and some shot down a bit. It was a whole new encyclopedia almost. When I put it together, it looked very different.
Well, of course, that brings up another interesting point in that, and I ran into this. I originally wrote the Giants of the Polo Grounds. My book was originally published in 1988, and then I did a revised and expanded version of it in 2018. And as I'm going through it and double checking stats and things, I realized there were discrepancies here and there. And then I realized that the official statistics had changed just within the last few years from time to time. And I even became even more aware of it because at one point I was thinking of pricing the Kindle version at, I mentioned this on Facebook, I'm thinking of pricing the Kindle version at $3.66 to commemorate Ty Cobb's lifetime batting average. And I started to get emails from people saying, hey, I learned it was 367. You know, I grew up with that statistic. You two guys know exactly what I'm talking about with this.
The contested 1910 batting rate.
Yeah, and I had to write back to people and say, well, first of all, it's going to cost more than that anyway. But second, Ty lost a couple of base hits because they were taken away from him by people who did the official research by Major League Baseball.
Yeah, that was 1922. 1920. That was the third year he won the hit 400. It was a 22. Mm-hmm. It was 22. I'm drawing a little bit of a blank. And they found that there was a game that was counted twice or something like that.
Yeah, and at the same time, I believe they took hits away from, would it have been Honus Wagner? Because people didn't field some of his hits in like 1907 or something because players didn't want Cobb to win the championship. So if he hit the ball at all, they just wouldn't play it, and it became a base hit.
No, that was Lajoie in 1910. They didn't take them away from him, but if you look at BaseballRef.com, it lists two batting champions that year with different averages. It credits both Cobb and Lajoie with the batting championships. It's crazy. And you're right, Cobb did get 2 extra hits. And when they were taken away, Lajoie won. But he won on the last day of the season when the Browns manager, Jack O'Connor, ordered his rookie third baseman, Red Corden, to play deep on Lajoie every time he came up. So Lajoie could lay it down and beat it out. I think he went something like 9 for 9 that day. But as a doubleheader.
Yeah. Play deep and don't be in any kind of rush to pick the ball up either.
One of the Sabre records committee meetings that I attended at one of the Nationals a bunch of years ago, the chairman, Lyle Spatz, said, I think it was like 1968, was the first year that the individual players on a team equaled the team numbers, and then all the team numbers equaled the league numbers.
Oh, really?
So it was a lot of this was going on, and the part of the period you two guys are discussing, the official scoring depended on the state of inebriation of the official scorer.
Yeah, there were huge discrepancies, and the stats for seasons never balanced. You had 27 outs. You had to have 27 outs. After every game, and a lot of times there'd be 26 outs in the score, or 27 or 28, and there had to be a balance at the end of the season too. The teams had to play a certain number of innings in order to get, if they played 154 games, they had played at least 9 times 154 innings, and there were always discrepancies. Forfeited games caused problems. Protested games caused problems. Pitching decisions weren't given often.
Rain-shortened games, like a 7-inning game called because of rain or something, would have been factored into not enough innings, right?
Right. Well, sometimes, games that not enough innings, and there were extra inning games that usually. What often happened was that a forfeited game was not, which had been considered an official game, was not counted in the final stats. And that was, as I said, was certainly true in the 1890s. It continued to be the case. It continues to be the case today. The teams, I believe from 1910 through 1919, all the successfully forfeited games, the stats from those games are still thrown out. They are not considered. And as a result, the 1918 batting championship was decided by this. The real winner, if all stats had been counted, was Ed Roush. But instead, the credit still goes to Zach Wheat, because Roush played in a game that had been successfully protested. So the stats were thrown out, and in the game he'd gone, I believe he got 2 hits in the game, and he went 0 for 3 when the game was replayed. So the 0 for 3 counted, the 2 hits were wiped out, and Zach Wheat won by 1 point. And Wheat had played in a game that was also protested, and he batted 5 times in the game, went 0 for 5, but that was thrown out. So Roush actually won by 2 or 3 points when everything was, by today's standard, he would have won by 2 or 3 points. But,
was Roush with the Giants or with Cincinnati at that time? Sorry, I didn't mean.
He was still with Cincinnati. Yeah, he was still with Cincinnati.
Okay.
Well, right now because of the way your schedules are, if you have a game that's suspended at Ballpark A, and it's an interleague game, and the only place they can finish it up is Ballpark B. But everything reverts. They finish it up in Ballpark B, but everything reverts to Ballpark A. Yeah. You have players getting credit for, say they come up from the minors getting credit for hits in ballparks they never played
in. That's exactly right.
Yeah, the whole thing is crazy. And the players in the minor leagues, and all of a sudden they're up and they're playing in Houston instead of Washington. Whatever.
You hit on something that most fans are unaware of that you can indeed have a two or three hits in a park that you don't get credit for in that park. Yeah, there's all kinds of crazy stuff that's happening now, and it's going to get with all the new rules that are coming in next year.
Well,
I pity official scorers
the ultimate was a couple of years ago. Benji Molina hit a apparent home run for the Giants.
Yeah.
And he was originally it was a single, and they sent in a runner. And, they had a review, and then they declared it a home run. But he was already out of the game. So, essentially, he hit a home run without scoring a run.
Credit for the runs, right.
Yeah,
right.
and so anyway, all the programs were not scheduled to, not programmed to, put in something like that. And they had to rewrite a whole bunch of programs to be able to record the home run without a run scored.
Yeah, that's. I think that's the only time that's happened, but it did happen.
Yeah,
and the umpires were stuck because replay had just come into being, and there was a ground rule in the Giants' new park that if a ball hits an awning and it's a green awning down the right field line, it's in fair territory. It's a home run if it hits the awning. And what happened was Molina hit the awning. Nobody realized it, and he was, being a slow runner, he was held to a single. And the pinch runner who had been designated to run for him, even before he came to bat, by Bochy, just came running out, trotting out, took first base. Molina came into the dugout, and Vizquel looked at Bochy and he said, I think that ball hit Omar Vizquel, who was then still with the Giants. I think that ball hit the awning, Bruce. And Bochy came out and got the ball that had been the home run ball that had now been trashed, thrown into the discard bag. He pulled it out and it had a green streak on it. And it sent the umpires into a tizzy. There was no replay on the field. They couldn't look. There was no cameras or anything on the field. They had to go inside the clubhouse to get the replay and see that the ball indeed had struck the awning, and then they came out and announced the home run. And by that time, Molina had been out of the game for 20 minutes. And so it was crazy. And the fans, of course, as always, were kept well informed of every step of this. Yeah. So
I'm sure. Yeah.
When the umpires came trotting out and just signaled, they all knew instantly what had happened. No, they went crazy. They had no idea what happened. Nobody did. Even I don't think even the press box knew what had happened.
There's a saying I use quite a bit. It says, once you think, especially watching baseball, once you think you've seen it all, you haven't.
No.
I swear. I'm sure you guys have the same thing happen every year. I've been watching baseball since the early 1950s, and every year I see things that I've never seen before.
Yeah. No,
oh yeah.
Yeah. And I've never seen only once have I seen the triple play happen.
Well, I've seen two. One of them was unassisted.
No.
I was at Yankee Stadium in Memorial Day, I think it was Memorial Day 2000. And there's a guy on the A's who had been with the Yankees. And there was a line drive hit him. He's playing shortstop. Either shortstop or second base. Randy Velarde was his name.
Yeah,
and he
that's right.
caught the ball, stepped on second to get the second out, and the runner from first was coming down, so he was able to tag him out. And it was so fast that I for a couple of seconds I didn't realize what happened.
Mm-hmm. The only two positions that can make an unassisted triple play would be middle infielders. It has to be second base or shortstop. I can, in my wildest flights of fancy, I cannot imagine any other position being able to do it.
Well, there is one. It was done in the Pacific Coast League game in 1909. Walter Carlisle made an unassisted triple play playing center field. He came in on a pop fly, nailed the pop fly, tagged second base, and then got the runner coming in from first.
Didn't Paul Hynd do that, or has that been discredited?
Paul Hynd was supposedly did that. It's never been clear. It's never been definitively established that he didn't do it. Right now, he's not given credit for it because it seems so impossible. But when you look at Carlisle's play, it's not impossible at all because the outfielders were playing even shallower in Heinz's time. And Hynd was a pretty good fielder. So it's entirely possible he could have done it. But there were throws made. But the throws, Hynd contended the throws came after he'd done what it took to do to make an unassisted triple play. The throws to bases were unnecessary. And, of course, there not being any video of the game, nobody knows. So,
No, I want to ask you. Yeah, no, I want to ask you, what was the toughest period that you had during the Giant book? Was that also 19th century?
In research?
Yeah.
Honestly, yeah, it probably was 19th century, and I approached it differently than I would have now. What I was limited to when I wrote the book in the 80s was trips to the New York Public Library to go through the huge collection of periodicals they had there and the microfilm collection. Now it would be a little easier because there's so much stuff online. So basically, I kind of decided on some reliable sources and went with those. So in some ways, it was an easier task, but not as thorough a task as it would be now. And the other thing is the publisher basically was not that interested in the 19th century parts of it. They found it fascinating after I pulled it together. But what they really wanted in the 1980s was a book that recalled the Polo Grounds to people who had parents who had been there. You have to realize it's like, 1985 would be, 35 years ago. A lot of people had fathers. It was a big Father's Day book in June of 1988. So that's really what the publisher wanted. And then, of course, they turned around and put a Smithsonian print from the 1890s on the cover. It was a very nice cover for the book.
Yeah, I have the hardcover. I think I may have bought that book the same year it came out.
I was wondering who bought it. It must have been you.
Yeah.
It was sold out.
It's like I found David's first edition of the 19th century encyclopedia in a bookstore called The Strand. This is before it was officially published. Yeah.
In fact, that older version of my book you can't find that many copies. And a couple of years ago, before I got into the revision of that book, I kept looking for extra copies to give away, and every time I find a copy online, it was $45 or $50. And I thought, whoa, people are getting that from my book. It's in rare book collections. So I thought, well, and I'm not getting any royalties on a used book. So that was one of the factors. That was one of the factors that pushed me towards redoing a new version.
That was a good move.
Yeah. I think so. Baseball still sells a fraction of what my spy stuff sells.
I know.
It's something I can't really stay away from because it's just so fascinating.
Yeah, because I have several of David's fiction books, and they're interesting to say the least.
He's probably the only one that's read more than one. No, my fiction is the opposite of yours, Noel. My baseball does much better than my fiction. Much as I hate to say it, but my fiction is my first love. But baseball
I'll tell you a story.
My life.
I'll tell you a story. I had David's first two trivia books. I got them in the 70s when they came out. I found them in the Barnes and Noble attics. And then he came out with two more, in the 90s, early 80s.
Yeah. You remember those in the early 90s.
Okay, and then we were having the 1991 Sabre convention nationally in New York. So a friend of mine, Steve Nadell, who was running it, calls me up and says, "I got Did anybody here ever hear the name David Nemec? And my eyes lit up, and so did a mutual friend, Scott Flato. And David came into that convention, and we spent a lot of time with him. And over the years, we've become pretty fast friends.
And we've become terrific trivia competitors too.
And because I was one of the very few people back then who knew who he was. The ones here, I mean, in New York, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a fun convention, and I had a great time. And then you and I roomed together in San Diego 2 years later.
Yeah.
In
New York, you guys won it. The team thing. The only thing I never did was, in the 13 years I played, was be the team that you were on.
Well, we had some good teams.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, but my single greatest moment happened in the final when Scott asked who's the only St. Louis Brown Hall of Famer to 2 home runs in a game. I was thinking right before the buzzer, I came out with Branch Rickey. I got a standing O for that.
You did. You deserved it because it completely slipped by me. Yeah. There were he had some very good questions. Who was the last National Leaguer to win Southpaw to win 30 games in a season? And when he asked that, my jaw fell up. I said, "Wow, this is a tough crowd." But I did have to
win.
Last National League lefty to win 30 games in a season.
Well, that must go back to the early 1900s or something, right?
Farther. Yeah. Somebody on your team, Al, guessed Carl Hubbell right away.
No, that's
it
couldn't have been Carl Hubbell because he wouldn't have asked that question if it was him.
No.
That was one of the things I learned from you is that if you write a question or you're answering a question that looks very easy on the face of it, it's not, because it wouldn't have never been asked.
Yeah, well, Scott did the same thing, and that this question was very tough. And it was Frank Killen.
Oh God! Wow.
1896. Yeah, with the Pirates. Killen was a very good pitcher for a while.
Yeah.
And, he did several very clever things.
I remember you asking me, because I wrote half of Milwaukee in 2001, and I remember you asked me which were mine. I told you. He said USOB, and I said I only learned from the best.
Yeah, well, those I could tell there were really some great questions, and there were some real clinkers.
But no, David and I, because I knew who he was, and I had trouble answering a lot of those questions in the first 2 books because they were really, really tough. And I'm very, very glad that over the years we become very, very fast friends.
Yeah.
And I hope you two guys have enjoyed this today. And
very
maybe
much.
given intervals, we can do this again because both of you have written baseball, both of you have written a lot of fiction, and I hope the two of you, enjoyed each other's experiences on this podcast.
Absolutely.
Well, I certainly did, and if I can just throw in one thing, David, I just friended you on Facebook, so take a look for that.
Okay.
And what I'd like to do
He's never on.
I never. I will go to. I do go to Facebook occasionally, so I will go. And
well, I'll tell you what. I'd like to send you a copy of one of your books if you could sign it and send it back to me. I'll send you.
We don't live too far. We don't live too far apart. You're in Irvine, right?
No, I'm in. Well, I'm not too far. I'm in Culver City, which is right near.
Oh, Culver City.
Beverly
Okay.
Hills. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we come through Culver City. We're in Laguna Woods.
Okay, which is south of LA, right?
Yeah, south of LA. We're near Mission Viejo and just south of Irvine.
Oh yeah, okay. I know where Mission Viejo is. I hid out there for 6 weeks one time. That's a story in itself. In any case, Alan, I think you were starting to.
Yeah, rather than send it to me, we come up that way. We'll work it out. We'll get we'll drop by and see, and if we can, and we'll get together for a bit. And I'll be glad to.
That sounds great.
Okay, David, I'm glad I found this out yesterday that Noel had confirmed today, and I'm very, very glad I was able to bring the two of you together.
Yeah, I'd love
Thank
to
you,
do
Alan.
it again.
We appreciate it.
Appreciate it, great.
Okay, we'll do this again sometime soon.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, goodbye, everybody.
All right.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.